I'm happy to welcome Rick Sharga again to our podcast. He's the president and CEO of CJ and Patrick Company. Um, I had a distinct pleasure to attend the Rick's hosted seminar last week in Washington D.C. about a block away from the White House, and I haven't been to such a great seminar that I told Rick he will have a sponsor for life because this is phenomenal, Rick. So, folks that Rick invited, folks from the industry, from the governments, Mark Calabria, Julia Gordon, folks from the industry. Chris Wayland, of course, my favorite. A guy that always has an opinion. He's a friend, and I love him to host on this podcast. And the discussions that we had were just phenomenal, down to the point. No water, no BS. A lot of very interesting ideas discussed. And I really wanted to invite Rick over to talk over some of the points that we discussed, some of the interesting positions that we took. But I'll let Rick, take over from this point on, and just what is your overall feel on your executive roundtable? Um,
Well,
Go ahead.
first of all, Alex, thank you for being a sponsor and for participating last week. As you said, it's an event that's called the Executive Roundtable for Mortgage Finance, and it's a roundtable event that's been around for about 17 years. I was fortunate enough to take it over from the original founder about 2 years ago. And it's an invitation only event where we get about 40 people at very, very senior levels from across the mortgage industry. And I think what's unique about this, and the reason I've been energized about continuing this process, is it's a unique opportunity to get a slice from across the industry. Um, Stan Middleman, who's the CEO of Freedom Mortgage, has been a somewhat regular attendee. We don't have the same 40 people every time. They kind of cycle in and out, but it's that level of person. And Stan said what he likes about the roundtable is usually when he gets invited somewhere, he winds up sitting around the room with a bunch of people who are basically stand at their own lending organizations. And he said it can kind of cause an echo chamber. In our case, we get people from mortgage lenders, from servicers, from trade associations, from the government, from research firms, securities companies, secondary markets. It's really a pretty wide cross sampling of people who are not afraid to come in and share their candid thoughts. And one of the reasons for that, and the reasons that you and I aren't going to be quoting anybody today in this podcast, is because we promise people that, like Las Vegas, what goes on at the round table stays at the round table, and so people really aren't afraid to speak their mind, and we, because of that, never invite media to attend either. And then a big part of what we do to try and make it worth everybody's while is we try and focus on topics that are of the most importance and the most current interest in the industry. And so, as you alluded to, we spent a bit of time talking about what's eventually going to happen with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We talked about um, the buying spree that Rocket has been on over the last 6 months, buying Redfin and Mr. Cooper. We talked about what's going on in the economy and the housing market. So across the board, wide range of topics, and happy to chat about with you with
Let's
any or all of
yeah,
those today.
let's dive in right to the topics. But before that, I wanted to echo that this is, I think, the only conference that allows us to interrupt some of the speakers, interject and insert your own opinion, ask for questions. So it's more a discussion than the presentation, which can be pretty dry and not applicable to everybody. I think everybody participated, right? So
Yeah.
everybody that were in that room had a either heated discussion or just asking questions to the right people to get the right answers. That was very impressive.
We had a gentleman who recently retired from one of the biggest servicers in the country after a long and distinguished career. And we had Julia Gordon speak last year in DC as well. And this person flew out from California to participate in the roundtable because he had a chance to ask Julia something face to face in a very, intimate, candid setting. And when her panel was over, he caught a flight back to California and left. So he basically flew cross country so he could ask one question, but he knew the venue was set up so that everybody who was there knew there were going to be questions, there was going to be conversation, there was going to be discussion. And I do my part as kind of the host and the moderator to keep things respectful and collegial. But the discussions are definitely no holds barred, and we ask anything at any time of anybody. So it's kind of fun from that perspective.
So Rick, for whoever listens to this podcast, find Rick's email and website. And if you're looking to participate, knock on Rick's door. And I'm sure there will be a lot of filtering involved. Not everybody will be able to have a chance to participate just because of the uniqueness of the event. Very exclusive, by invitation only. So, like I said, I'm very lucky, and I'm very thankful to Rick for inviting me, as it helped my business to focus in some areas where the discussion took place, position my business in a way where some of the products that we're developing need to be tuned up, and positioned specifically for what's going to happen in 2025. So
And
let's
that's
get
and
go
that's
ahead.
and that, by the way, Alex, that's exactly how I hope event sponsors use the roundtable. This, and you know this from participating this most recent one. This is a no sales event, so
Yeah,
this is not something where the sponsors dominate the topics or the conversations. Um, Hard sales pitches are not allowed, but you walk away with some contacts. You have a seat at the table, which is kind of a mutual respect thing, and you also can very often walk away with some insights that give you a leg up on your competition, and that's really how this is supposed to work, and I'm glad that that's how it's working for you.
absolutely. So let's dive in. Where do we want to start? Let's start with Fannie and Freddie, right? So we had a whole session on the projections on what's going to happen. Will it exit the GSEs? How? What tools? What do you remember from that discussion, and what do you think will actually happen?
We kinda had a snapshot of the ongoing debate that you see more broadly across the industry. On the one hand, there's a question of whether we need to release them from conservatorship because things are running pretty smoothly the way they are right now. Fannie and Freddie collectively probably control 60 to 70% of all the conventional loans that are out there, the bulk of the mortgages in the industry. Those loans are performing extraordinarily well, probably better than they have in history. Both entities are making money. And you run the risk of upsetting the mortgage industry, its stability, its processes if you cut these guys loose. So there is one school of thought that's very much along the lines of, I'm not sure we really need to do this, and there's some downside risk if we did it and did it incorrectly. On the other side of the fence, um, the estimates that I've seen, and these were kind of validated by our speakers, are that the government in a one-time sell-off, rolling these 2 entities back into the public markets, would probably capture somewhere between, depending on whose numbers you believe, 400 and $600 billion. And for a federal government that's running an annual $2 trillion budget, that's no small amount of money, that you could be bringing in. The other thing that releasing the entities from conservatorship would do that is a potential benefit for taxpayers is you would, theoretically at least, take taxpayers off the hook for probably close to $2 trillion in unpaid principal balances that right now the government is 100% the backstop for. So that's really pretty much the rationale. There is a lingering group of early investors in Fannie and Freddie who believe that if these entities are released from conservatorship, they'll see a significant benefit, a boom in their stock value. Seems likely from the conversation we had that if these entities are released, that's not what's going to happen. That there are ways of releasing it that the government would basically benefit the most, and the individual shareholders much less so. But yet, it's the I think the other consensus really is that if something's going to happen, it's probably not going to happen very, very soon. It's probably more like a 2027, 2028 initiative, which raises a whole series of other issues like can the administration actually roll these folks out if they don't have control of the House and the Senate again? And usually the incumbent party loses at least one of those houses in the midterm. So will anything happen? Don't know, but that's kind of the rationale for the pros and cons.
Yeah, so if I would be a betting man and I would play the stock market, the um, fast rise in the stock of Fannie and Freddie is not really justifiable because we don't know what's going to happen, right? So the intent was, hey, Trump wants an exit, and I think from our discussion, I remember that the method of the exit was already established during Trump dot 1.0. In the first presidency of Trump, there was a proposal that would create a sovereign wealth fund, and then do a conversion of shares and then purchase of the common shares of the Fannie and Freddie, sort of a share buyback type of thing to make them private again, right?
Well,
Which
I think there's 2 parallel paths there,
yeah, yeah.
Alex. I don't think the original plan actually called for the creation of a sovereign wealth fund. There was a plan put in place during the first Trump administration,
Mhm.
that candidly they ran out of time and will to execute. I think one of the newer themes is one way to do that this time would be to take the proceeds of the sale, create a sovereign wealth fund, and then do what you were talking about. So, um, I don't know that the administration has decided it wants to do this for sure. I don't think if they when they make that decision, they're 100% certain how they'll go about doing it. But this administration in its prior iteration certainly had a lean toward moving more of the mortgage industry back into the private capital markets. And I wouldn't be surprised if this comes up again, particularly if there is such a huge financial windfall while the government's trying to rebalance the budget.
So really, if I approach this with logical aspects, knowing that during the midterms you'll have a split House and Senate that will probably not allow Fannie and Freddie to be privatized, then I would bet that nothing will happen, right? And therefore, people that are investing in stock right now, I don't think that would be a very wise investment, and that would be pretty risky as well. Um, but who knows, right? So right now, what we've heard uh, was that it's not on top priority list
Right.
for the Trump administration. Obviously, tariffs and tax cuts is higher priority. That has to sort of fill in the gap in 2025, and then um, it's not clear what's going to be the priority for Fannie and Freddie on the list of top priorities. It definitely is a priority, right? Maybe top 10, but like you said, it's a 2027, 2028 type of initiative, which might not even happen because of the mid term elections.
Yeah, one of the downside risks is that because of the capital requirements that Fannie and Freddie would have as private companies, um, based on the current models, they might have to increase their G fees, which is the fee they charge when they're issuing a mortgage, which would make borrowing more expensive. And the administration did campaign on lowering the cost of living, including the cost of home purchases. So, whatever, whenever this does become a top priority, I think it's really going to require um, very thoughtful process in order to ensure that they don't accidentally make housing even more unaffordable than it is today.
Yeah, agreed. So affordability is certainly a topic that they want to escalate as probably higher than the privatization of Fannie and Freddie. Um, but even getting there, let's talk about you know what programs are available for delinquent borrowers today, and let's touch on VESP. Right. So we saw that the program for veterans that are delinquent is ending and not being um, restarted on 5/1. So we only have, when we're recording this, we're almost at the deadline, few days away, and nothing will fill the gap. And we talked about a PR nightmare issue of foreclosures being started on veterans, and the estimates are. Do you remember what was the number? 15 or 50,000 veterans.
Yeah. So for your viewers who aren't familiar with this, the VASP program was something that the Veterans Administration came up with about a year ago, in response to the fact that they didn't have some of the loss mitigation options for veteran borrowers that typical consumers had from a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or an FHA. And what VASP was going to do was take that veteran borrower who didn't qualify for any of the other loss mitigation programs available through the VA, and as a last resort, the VA would actually buy the loan back from whoever the current note holder was from the servicer, and they would refinance the borrower at a 2.5% rate in an effort to get their monthly payments down and allow the borrower hopefully to be able to afford to make those payments and get them out of arrears. And that was the working plan as we got through last year. Um, what a lot of people probably also don't realize is the VA can't do anything literally without an act of Congress. Being a governmental department, all of their funding has to be approved through Congress. And the new Congress, um, the old Congress had some hesitations about VASP. The new Congress doesn't like it at all. They don't really want to be in the business of buying and holding these delinquent loans. Um, and the reality is that the VASP program is not going to be funded in the current budget. Now, to your point, there's another program that the FHA is running, and we'll probably talk about that in a minute or two. But it's called a partial claims program, where you can tap into the equity you have in a property, use that equity to pay your past due amounts, and get yourself current again, and hopefully that gets you over the hump, and you can start making your payments on a regular basis. Um, the VA doesn't have that program, so that's not available to borrowers who are in default. And so what happens is on May 1st, when the VASP program expires, now that the VA's foreclosure moratorium has been over for a while, there are tens of thousands of borrowers who are basically out of loss mitigation options, out of loan modification options, and likely to wind up finding themselves in foreclosure, or in a foreclosure they can't work their way out of. And from my perspective, and from a lot of the people sitting around the table last week, the perspective of those folks, a shared perspective, is our veterans who have sacrificed so much and risked so much for us. They're the last people you want to be foreclosing on. So I know the Mortgage Bankers Association has been lobbying heavily, trying to get some sort of stopgap program in place or get a partial claims program implemented at the VA, but it's hard to see Congress moving quickly enough. And there is going to be a window of time between May 1st and whenever something else happens, where a lot of those veteran borrowers are going to fall through the cracks, which is really, really unfortunate.
I think we brainstorm at the meeting about two possible solutions. One is less realistic than the other. We actually talked about states stepping
Mhm.
in and providing some moratorium on the state level to pause the foreclosures on veterans, but that will require coordination across all states. Maybe Bob at MBA will help out and coordinate that effort. And the second proposal that we kind of it's an obvious one, right? Let's solve the income problem of the veterans and possibly extend the tax credits to businesses that will hire vets, especially in the delinquent status, to given the income that they desperately need to pay off the loan, or at least to be current, at the same time, solving the employment issue for the veterans by getting the credits that the businesses can use, and it's a no-brainer for the businesses to hire. It's not that many, right? It's call it anywhere from 22 to 50,000 people that you would give the credits to get hired. But those are type of the proposals that we get at the executive roundtable, and certainly, it's a brainstorming session, and people talk and chat about different ideas. And I think states one is the one that caught people's attention.
Yeah, to your point, I the loans are gonna be dispersed across the country. They tend to be a little bit more concentrated around where there are bases,
Yeah,
um, because that's where a lot of the military families that are active are buying these properties. Um, so you could see state moratoria in place. Those could be challenged by the note holders, as whether or not the state has legal standing, but just that delay might be what those borrowers need until Congress gets its act together and does something. I think the notion of grants or increased pay, unfortunately, would have to go through Congress. So I'm not sure that moves things any faster. You could see the VA, extend a moratorium again temporarily, but for whatever reason, it doesn't seem inclined to do that right now. So it's I know it's something we'll all be watching, and I'm hoping for the best for our veterans and their families who really don't deserve to be going through this.
I agree. I hope Congress feels the urgency and something will be put in place, or at least a clear vision on what's going to happen. A month, 2 months from now, we just don't get that sign from Washington today. Um, let's switch to the topic that you kind of alluded to: partial claims, loan mods. Um, let's I guess start off by saying that current administration, Trump 2.0, doesn't forgive student loans, doesn't forgive Department of Energy loans, doesn't forgive USDA loans, and certainly, you know, they wanted to limit the amount of, call it, bites at the apple when you deal with partial claims and loan mods. So, sort of, what's your view, and what's the view of the audience at the executive roundtable that sort of covers that topic?
So, at the risk of sounding like Snidely Whiplash or Simon Legree or some other either evil character from literature, um, I'm I'm kind of not bothered by the notion of the government deciding it's not going to be forgiving loans for people that actually borrowed money. I get that sometimes you fall on hard times and there are tools that you lever to kind of get out from under that debt. But I borrowed money and I don't have to pay it back because I don't feel like it really isn't a particularly compelling argument for somebody who's been paying taxes for the last 40 years. Um, so there is that, but that's not really what partial claims was all about. What partial claims is sort of another last resort loan modification or loss mitigation tactic, and it's available because across the country today, there's a record amount of homeowner equity. There's about $35 trillion in homeowner equity, and if you're a borrower who bought your house probably before 2022, you experienced a pretty significant lift in your home value, and really home prices didn't start to settle down until the second half of 2022 when mortgage rates doubled. So if you're an FHA borrower, you're probably a little bit more vulnerable to problems. Historically, that's been the case because you're very often a first time buyer, so you didn't start with a lot of equity to use as a down payment. You probably bought a house with a very low down payment loan, as low as 3.5%. And just because of where you were in your financial life cycle, you probably have lower cash reserves. You probably have a higher debt to income ratio. Um, I used to refer to it as the water heater challenge, which is that you're playing so tight with your household finances that you're, one broken water heater away from missing a mortgage payment, and that can start a really nasty cycle. So for those FHA borrowers who, are kind of right on the edge there, um, this partial claims program is a lifeline. And the way it works is you miss a couple of months of payment, maybe because you were out of work for a month or two, but now you have a new job. And your servicer will basically tap the equity you have in your house to pay off your past due amounts and take that amount and add it to your mortgage, as something that you will have to pay at the end of the mortgage. And so, whether that means you wait till the end of 30 years and that's when it's due, or you refinance or you sell your property and that's when it's due, but it's basically an interest-free second loan that gets tacked onto your mortgage that gets you out of trouble temporarily. And that's really what it was intended to be. And the FHA will allow you to take up to 30% of the unpaid balance of your mortgage. So if you have a $100,000 loan, you can take up to $30,000 in this partial claims program. Um, Unfortunately, the program came without certain guardrails, and I don't think FHA ever anticipated that borrowers would take out multiple partial claims in a very short period of time, but that's effectively what's happened over the last 12 to 18 months. So you had borrowers who had a certain amount of equity and would get 2, 3 months behind due on their loans. They'd reach out to the servicer, or the servicer would reach out to them. They would execute the partial claims. They'd put that on the back of the mortgage. They'd make payments for a couple months, and they go delinquent again. And then they'd get another partial claim, and then they'd be okay for a couple months, and then they go delinquent again. And so one of my friends referred to this as the wash, rinse, spin cycle of loan modification. But the net effect of all this is you're eating up all of your equity. And you get to a point where you can't take out any more partial claims. And if you fall into default at that point, if you do lose your house, you've just burned away a significant amount or maybe all of your equity. So you don't have any cash to get a fresh start with. Or, and this is particularly true for people who took out an FHA loan from about the middle of 2022 forward, you might be in negative equity. You actually might owe more on your mortgage, than what the property is worth. So the FHA has put in some restrictions that they probably never thought they'd have to put in the first place, but now starting in October, you're only gonna be able to take one of these partial claims every 24 months, and you will be required to be in a 3-month test period where you have to make your payments as promised on time in order to qualify for the partial claim. So they really have put some restrictions in place that make this a little bit more serious, and that unfortunately for some of these borrowers will probably take them from delinquency into foreclosure, if they can't meet their obligations. But at least if that happens, it should be happening before they've exhausted all their equity, so they'll have at least something to start with when they do have to move on.
Yeah, I have to. Listening to you, I do want to make 2 points. One is the wheel that the borrowers were on all the time. It's not that, there were other options, but the servicers were incentivized to offer that option over and over and over again because of the credits and benefits that they would be getting from the governments. And government's direction with 2.0 says, okay, guys, slow down. You really have to give just one shot at the recovery, or let's say somebody will lose a job and find a job within 3 months to get back to paying the mortgage on time. So that's sort of the point number one. And point number two, based on what you're saying, um, with the projection of home prices dropping in many metropolitan areas by 5 to 10%, or some areas will fall 20% from the peak of 2023, with the partial claims, there will be no other options but to foreclose on a property to remove the, I guess, second liens, which are hard liens and partial claim liens, from the property. Otherwise, you just don't have enough. Like you said, you have a negative equity, which means the property is unsellable. You can't sell it, right? The only way to sell it is deed in lieu or cash for keys, right?
Well, I'm gonna push back on you on both things in the spirit of our candid roundtable
Let's do it.
conversations.
I love it.
On the latter one, yeah, I mean, the troubling part about the FHA portfolio right now is there's a lot of early stage delinquencies, and what that means is people that recently took out a mortgage have already gone delinquent. So they probably overextended themselves to buy in the first place, and then we had that water heater problem that I talked about, or they had a car repair or something that put them on a bad cycle. Um, so there are going to be negative equity situations. Something that people don't talk about today that we saw a lot of during the great financial crisis was short sales are an option there. And I think for some of those borrowers, you will wind up with short sales. That's almost the same as a foreclosure, and often doesn't start till somebody's in a foreclosure process. But in addition to deed in lieu or a standard foreclosure, which probably is a non-recourse situation, I think you will find some more short sales in this area. Where I'm going to push back is I'm not buying the sky is falling forecasts I'm seeing from too many people on YouTube. We may have a market here or there somewhere where prices fall 20%, but everybody I talk to is in the same boat, which is uh, home prices on a year over year basis nationally are going to be somewhere between flat and up by 2-ish%, which means some markets will be higher than that and some markets will be lower than that. And we're already seeing about 60 metro areas across the country where prices are down year over year, but we're seeing low single digit decreases. Um, I
Perhaps the highest one presented was 9% down, right? In Florida
say
by
again.
I
Yeah,
think,
there are places in the Gulf Coast of Florida, Punta
yep.
Gorda. There are some very unique market conditions going on in that area that have a lot to do with insurance costs, in some cases being higher on a monthly basis than your mortgage payment, and one-time assessments, particularly in the condo market, as some new state regulations have been put into place because of the collapse of that condo building a couple of years ago. So there are some very unique scenarios going on in Florida. You have a state like Idaho where Boise saw prices go up 47% in a year a couple of years ago, where you could have double-digit declines as the market resets. Austin might be another market, but I don't want anybody walking away from this conversation expecting to see home prices plummeting, across the country, or even in too many markets because that just sets up bad expectations, people waiting too long to make a move to buy a house because Alex told me prices are gonna crash. So I just,
I
I
think
don't know that's gonna be the case.
Yeah, I think one of the presenters said it's a reverse to the mean, right? So, in other
Yeah,
words, for the migration out of the cities during COVID,
yeah.
the prices saw a drop, and now people are coming back to those cities like Chicago, like Omaha. The prices are growing, while in the places where people migrated to, and now they have to go back to the office in New York, Chicago, and Detroit, they're moving away from the properties in Florida, and that's where the biggest drops are, right, on the annual basis. So it's sort of a
It's a
equalizer.
little bit it's a little bit more nuanced than that,
Yeah,
but some of the like, for example, Chicago, we are seeing prices go up in Chicago, even though population actually is going down in the metro area. The reason for that is nobody's building. There's nobody building anything in Chicago. So, and you do have people demographically aging into where they're ready to form households. So they have to live somewhere. And to your point, we are starting to see a migration, interestingly enough, mostly of young people back into some of these major metropolitan areas. Um, because of because prices came down a bit, they're a little bit more affordable than they used to be, and those areas have always been attractive to young adults. So we are seeing a bit of a reversion to the mean. That's different than home prices cratering. But I want to go. But It's all gonna be local. You need to be paying very close attention to your local market or where you are, where you're interested in buying, because what's happening in Hartford, Connecticut is not the same thing that's happening in Hampton Roads, Virginia, or Hershey, Pennsylvania. It's all different. I had to find all H's there for some reason. I do wanna go back to your servicer point, though.
Yeah,
There was a really badly written article in the Wall Street Journal, an op-ed piece about a month or so ago that was talking about this FHA partial claims program and claiming it was a get rich quick thing for servicers and that the government was hiding millions of foreclosures. I've never seen an article quote so much data incorrectly, and quote it so very incorrectly, all in such a concise space. I have to give the writer credit for that. Servicers are not getting rich on the partial claims program. In fact, servicers, most people don't realize this. When you stop making your mortgage payments, your servicer has to continue to make those mortgage payments on your behalf to the note holder. So the longer you're delinquent, the more the mortgage servicer's out of pocket. Most servicers are not banks, so they don't have deposits to tap into. So they have to go raise capital in order to pay mortgages that you're not paying for. What partial claims allowed them to do was to keep people off the delinquency and default rolls. And to your point, that is something that's important to them. They don't like to have a lot of people delinquent. They don't like to have a lot of people in default because that does ding them as a servicer from the people that are issuing these loans. So there is some benefit that they were having there, but the only reason they were using partial claims is because nothing else would work for the borrower. You have to remember the most common way that a servicer is able to get a borrower into a loan modification program is by offering them a lower mortgage rate. And that hasn't been available since the middle part of 2022. So you look at that, you look at forbearance, you look at extending the loan terms out from 30 to 40 years. And at some point, you run out of other options, and all that's left for you is that partial claims option. Where I think this got into trouble was it worked 3 months ago, let's do it again, and that became a bad practice, and that's the one that's getting stopped right now. So look, there's, about 750,000 FHA borrowers who are delinquent across the country. Um, Odds are that a lot of them are 30 days delinquent, and FHA will tell you that they always carry a lot of 30-day delinquencies because people just get behind, and then they keep making their payments, but they never catch up on the one that they missed. The ones that are more problematic is there's about 250,000 that are 90 days or more past due, and those are the ones we have to watch from a foreclosure perspective over the next couple of years.
interesting. Now, we're not talking about COVID mods anymore, right? Those are done. They're not extending. Remember, there were COVID mods, COVID flex mods, all kinds of weird scenarios to keep
The
the
the the the
borrowers.
big the big 2 things, Alex, were, as you know, a foreclosure moratorium on all government loans. So that was Fannie, Freddie, FHA, USDA, VA, all on moratorium. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. Um, that's been over for a couple years now. There was also a forbearance program where if you reached out to your servicer and said, "Hey, COVID's affecting my income," they had to put you in forbearance for at least 3 months and up to 2 years. And you were technically past due on your loan, so we saw past due numbers go up, yeah, like crazy, but you weren't being reported to the credit bureaus, and there was really no ding on your credit in the long run, no interest being charged, and what we saw was 8.6 million people go through that COVID forbearance program. Of those, about 35% left successfully. This is going back to June of 2020. And by successfully, I mean they either had actually continued making their payments even though they didn't have to. So when they exited the program, they just kept making payments. They had their loans reinstated, which means as soon as they left, they started making payments again and actually caught up on the past due amounts, or they sold off the property or refinanced the loan. So 35% went that way. 45% left in some sort of loan modification or loss mitigation program. And that's what you're referring to as these COVID relief programs. Of that 45%, almost 70% of those are still making their payments on time. So it was a remarkably successful program, probably best example in my career of the government and the mortgage industry working together. Um, there was another 20% that left. They were delinquent. They didn't have a loan modification in place. Ostensibly, some of them are still working with their servicers to figure something out, but that's the percentage, that's the group that is probably most worrisome. But interestingly, I was smiled when you talked about this because the forbearance program lives, even though there's nothing going on for COVID. There's about 230,000 people that are still in forbearance, but almost all of them now are in because of either natural disasters or some other temporary financial hardship. So servicers are using the forbearance program kind of as a bucket where they put people while they're trying to figure out if they can do something else, or if there's been an extreme weather event that's just kind of rocked their world and they need to be in some sort of forbearance program. But I think less than 3% of the people still in the program are there for some COVID related issue. And it'll be interesting to see how the other folks all perform as they exit the program. My suspicion is probably not as well.
It sounds like, and remember, we started the conversation for with me saying I am retooling the products specifically based on our discussion, and one of the product that we're launching is the mod generator over API, instant mod generator, because it sounds like there will be a lot of transition from forbearance mods to a flex or standard mods, FHA mods, the next VA mod. So there will always be a new program that will enable the borrower to be kept in the home, and for us to be fast in addressing the issue of generating the documents, making sure there's no 30-day delay
Yeah.
because it affects them so much. 30-day will put them in the tier of foreclosure versus staying in the home. So it's the efficiency and at least signing and expediting the documents and review of the documents and applying AI. We talked about AI a bit, right? To evaluate whether somebody is fitted for a particular program or a particular bucket, right? So just to piggyback to what you said, a lot of things that we're talking about reflected on how we address the product market and from the service level perspective, what products are uh, needed to be available in the market to take advantage of to make things more efficient or cheaper or faster or benefiting the borrower.
I'll tell
But
you something else that we heard at the roundtable that I'd heard prior to the roundtable, but certainly heard it validated there is the title companies, and I know you run one, are having a really hard time being accurate with these partial claims liens. I know companies that have been trying to get that information, and it becomes a huge, huge issue for somebody qualifying for a loan mod or a refinance if somebody doesn't find out until, everybody's sitting around the table ready to sign that, oh, by the way, there happens to be another $10,000 lien on the property from this partial claims program that didn't show up in the preliminary search. So just the industry getting a little bit more accurate about being able to track those loans, I think will save a lot of people a lot of grief going forward.
not just track, but also timely release them
Yeah,
because you need to make
yeah,
sure that the title is free and clear for a borrower to get a new loan or get a new mod or hard loan. It just you have to do things efficiently enough to get the borrower in the position of qualifying for, rather than hey, we have a hair on the title that we need to clean up and it'll take 6 months and
yeah.
the borrower is already delinquent. So absolutely agree with you. But let's talk about we talked about the borrowers, right? So it's a great transition to the labor market, right? We talked about the expectations from folks that were presenting in 2025, 2026. To me, it sounded more grim than happy, right? With all the layoffs in the government institutions, we just saw an announcement yesterday that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is laying off what 1,500 people. Well, they already been laid off. We're just getting the announcement, and only 10 people left, right, in CFPB for the
No,
enforcement
no, no.
actions.
There was one department where there were 200, Now there's only 10. They didn't go from 1,500 to 10.
Yeah, yeah.
That was
The
just one
enforcement,
department.
I believe it's an enforcement department, right?
It
But
was, I was, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's pretty significant numbers when you add all departments together. So you would expect the unemployment to tick up a bit, right? And therefore, it'll uh, and everybody had the same feeling that feds will need to cut rates because they shift from the inflation criteria to unemployment rate criteria, and the labor market will worry them more than the inflation itself, therefore translating to 2 to 3 cuts in 2025. Is that what you felt, and
Yeah,
how the
you
conversation went?
threw out a whole lot there, Alex. Let's
Yeah,
unpack
okay.
some of it here. So the federal government, and I didn't know this until this administration came in and started doing cuts, but the federal government directly employs over 3 million people across the country. I had no idea it employed that many people, and I probably should have, but I didn't. And that doesn't count contractors. There's countless more contractors involved, and then third party organizations that the contractors hire, and on and on and on. Um, and so it's a fairly big organization, but it's not one of the biggest employers in the country, interestingly enough. So even if the administration was successful in reducing headcount by 10%, you're talking about 300,000 people in a country of 330 million people. So it's significant, but it's not going to crater the employment market. Um, Consumer confidence is more of a worry for me. Consumer confidence is the lowest it's been in decades, continues to weaken, and 70% of the US economy is made up of consumer spending. So if consumers continue to be glum, they may start spending less. If they spend less, the country's economy grows more slowly, or worse, reverses course and goes into a recession, in which case we lose more jobs, in which case people spend less. And you see how those cycles kind of continue. Um, the economists that we had with us were relatively aligned that they don't see the economy growing terribly quickly. The other thing that most economists will tell you is that historically, if somebody were to implement the kind of tariffs that the administration is talking about implementing, two things happen almost every time. One is you see a short term bump in unemployment, and so unemployment numbers go up. The other is that you see inflation increase because the cost of goods and services goes up, and that's the speculation from virtually everybody. If we were to see the kind of tariffs that the administration has proposed actually get executed. Um, Whether or not that happens, or whether all this is mostly a negotiating posture to try and get our trade balance a little bit more in line, or whether to bring certain types of manufacturing back on shore, really anybody's guess. So it's hard to forecast going forward. But all the forecasts that I've seen, including by the economists who were represented at the roundtable, call for unemployment to go up somewhere into the high 4%, maybe as high as 5% range by the end of this year. And that will be noticeable, but it also isn't high by historic levels. Typically, economists will tell you unemployment in the US at 5% or lower is considered to be pretty much full employment. We're not seeing a lot of layoffs. We're not seeing a lot of quits. So it seems like both employees and employers are reluctant to move at the moment. There are still more jobs available than there are people looking for work. So we're getting mixed signals from the employment sector in the market, and hopefully we get through the volatility that we're experiencing right now without cratering the economy.
I think one of the economists, just to piggyback to what you said that there are two factors that are involved in the current sort of labor market: mismatch in skill sets
Yep.
and inability for recent grads from colleges to find a job, right? Because they don't have or might not have the right skill sets to enter the job market. So those two really play big roles in the overall unemployment market. Is that what you see as well. So it's not a matter of layoffs or hiring freezes. It's a matter of just a mismatch on on the labor market with the skill set that somebody that is let go from the governments or just entering the market as a fresh grad from college. They just don't have the right skill sets to contribute to the company, and therefore they sit on the sidelines.
Yeah, it turns out that, Baltic poetry degree isn't as marketable as somebody thought it was, when they paid $80,000 a year for their sorry. It's yeah, there has been a mismatch for a few years, actually, and I think it's probably a little worse today than it was a couple of years ago. We do see a lot of jobs opening in service level, in the trades, a lot of trade jobs, construction. There's actually manufacturing jobs open, which is interesting because we're talking about trying to bring more manufacturing jobs onshore. But if you were a loan officer who got laid off because the volume of mortgage loans is half of what it was a couple of years ago, that doesn't necessarily translate into one of the job openings right now for welder or electrician, and so there is a bit of that mismatch. There's some geographical mismatches. We still have people looking for work in markets where there are no jobs and jobs open where there are no people. And so it's fairly typical, but I think you're talking about a couple of things that are a little more noticeable now than they are normally. It and I think one of the one of the things that kind of proves that is it's taking longer for people when they lose a job to get their next one. And that means that, similar jobs aren't necessarily open and available. A lot of people are worried about what happens with AI. Is that going to eliminate a lot more jobs? I suspect it will, but I also suspect that it will create a bunch of jobs that didn't exist until now, because that's happened every technology cycle I've lived through in the last 30 or 40 years. We just can't figure out what that is. So I know the administration is looking to get more jobs that are easier to train people into, back on shore. That does take time. What we do in the meantime is anybody's guess. And the hope is that we don't see enough of an economic downturn that unemployment spikes, because if it does, it's probably going to be very hard for some of those people to find their way back into jobs they really want.
What I wish from Trump administration is to not just say we have $10 billion investment from SoftBank. I don't know, 100 billion, whatever the number was. Investment in what? TSMC investing in the semiconductor manufacturing plant. Where and who's going to be bridging the labor gap that was lost with respect to outsourcing all the semiconductor jobs to Taiwan, to China? How do you bring people back? It takes years to get trained, and people that were a part of this industry. I was one of them, by the way. I left the industry a long time ago. I'm not coming back. So it's not clear to me whether the investment back to the U.S. to put the manufacturing back in the U.S. will translate necessarily to successful initiatives, just because you probably need to bring people from outside of the U.S.
I
So
can answer
extend the.
one of your questions.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
The Taiwan funding is going into Arizona first.
Okay,
They're
nice.
they they're and they've actually broken ground or are building facilities in Arizona. So what will happen while they're building that, and you're right, it's gonna take a couple of years, is we're gonna see a lot of construction jobs. We're gonna see architectural and design jobs. We're gonna see manufacturing of materials and supplies that are needed, to build those facilities and to run those facilities. We'll see infrastructure investment, as we build roads and put in power and so forth, into the grid to build those. So you'll see that. The specialty jobs you're talking about, I don't know where they're coming from either. Hopefully, somebody who is taking that Baltic poetry class sees us talking and says, "You know what? I can go to work in a chip plant in a couple of years, so I'm gonna change my major." Um, or we probably wind up, and I know nobody's gonna wanna hear this, but we probably wind up with, an influx of H-1B visa folks who can actually do those jobs coming in. and then training the next generation. But you're right. There's no easy answer to this. One of the things I think the tariff conversation has raised, and if it hasn't, I know COVID did as well. And by the way, President Biden was talking about this, so this is not a partisan issue. Is we are very vulnerable as a non-manufacturer of certain types of things. For example, we import virtually all of our basic pharmaceuticals from China. If we get China pissed off enough and they say, "No drugs for you," we're in trouble.
Yep.
We're gonna have a lot of sick people that are dying, and that's a problem. So, was it a smart thing for us to let all of that manufacturing go offshore? Probably not. Was it a smart thing for us to let all the chip manufacturing go offshore? Because we use those chips for everything. The devices that we're using to communicate today, our smartphones, our cars, our defense equipment, but we're very vulnerable not having this chip manufacturing. So the administration talked about using a scalpel and then came in with a battering ram. And I wish they'd been a little more strategic in their discussion. But if you were to say to me, I'd love to see more chip manufacturing, I would love to see more refining of rare earth materials that we need for all this electronic equipment. I'd like to see more targeted manufacturing of chips and other needed materials and products. That makes a lot of sense, and that will create a lot of jobs. And hopefully, some of those facilities are being put in places where we do need more jobs. I know Ohio is supposed to be getting some of these facilities as well. So, you and I probably are smart enough to know better, but I'm still very hopeful there's really a plan somewhere where all this makes sense. And maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised to find out there actually was one.
Yeah, I agree. I am hopeful. Even though I've been to that industry, I know all the challenges. While it was a full employments, and I was a part of Bell Labs,
Yep.
we had first laser, first transistor, tons of patents. It was a culture that inspired people, inspired engineers, future engineers, and now it's all gone, all
Yep.
gone.
Yep.
And to rebuild that culture, it'll take years, and it's not popular. I'd rather be a goofball on TikTok and make the same amount of money than than an engineer architect of microchips, right? So that's where we end up with. But who knows? Maybe you'll bring people with H-1B, put them in the path of citizenship, and that's going to be inspiring enough to rebuild that industry here in the U.S. I'm hopeful.
Me too.
Yeah.
We need it, so I'm very hopeful.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time. Rick, I wanted to ask you final thoughts on 2025. You don't see a crash, housing crash. A lot of talking heads on YouTube and other podcasts are saying 25, 30% down, market will crash, housing will crash, recession will be imminent at the end of the year. You'll see a lot of foreclosures. That's actually I'm agreeing with, but for a different reason. So what's your feel and how do you look at the market towards end of 2025?
If we were to see a 25 to 30% decrease in home prices, it would be because people had to sell. That's actually what happened during the great financial crisis is people had to sell their homes because they were being foreclosed on, because their loans reset from a 2% teaser rate to a 6% interest rate, and they couldn't handle the increased payment. And there were just a whole set of dominoes that fell at the same time and took the market down. The people that are calling for that, you will find by and large are trying to sell you something, thousands of dollars worth of programs that will help you take advantage of the 25 to 30% discount. So I'd be careful about that.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing I would suggest is that to prove that I have no life and need better hobbies, I went back and did an analysis of home prices over the last 100 years. We've only ever had a 20% drop once in the last 100 years. And that happened during the 2008 recession. And it was because things were so out of control and crazy. But lenders have taken most of the risk out of lending since then, mostly because the government required them to. But some of them were already doing that. So there's a lot less risk involved in the market. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Every market is going to see home prices go up. I'm not even going to sit here and tell you that I'm 100% sure that nationally home prices will go up this year. I personally think nationally they will wind up going up this year about 2.5%. But that means some markets are going to go up, some markets are going to go down. And it's going to depend a lot on population growth and job growth and wage growth in those individual markets. I do think foreclosure activity will go up this year. That is what you referred to earlier as an economist talking about reversion to the mean. We're way below normal levels of foreclosure activity. A big part of that has been the FHA program keeping people out of foreclosure. We will start to see more of those people enter foreclosure. And I do think we'll see the economy slow down, whether or not we see all those tariffs hit the way they're being talked about, and we'll see unemployment go up a little bit. So I'm not looking for a boom year either economically, from an employment standpoint, from a housing market standpoint. I do think we'll see slightly more homes sold this year than we did last year. I do think nationally prices will go up this much. And by the way, if they go up 2%, that's less than inflation. So they're actually not going up at all in real terms. And I do think we'll see more foreclosures, but I don't think we'll get back to pre-pandemic levels really until probably sometime next year. So that's my take on the market, and I guess we can do this in a year and see how wrong I was.
Yeah, a lot of valuable information, Rick. We're out of time. When will I see you next time? What conference are you going to?
I'm not going to the National Association of Mortgage Field Services in a week. And I'll also be at the ALFN Answers Conference in July and probably at the Five Star in September. And then we'll have our next executive roundtable for mortgage finance again back in DC in October. So if I don't see you before then, I'll certainly see you then.
Sounds good. Rick, thanks so much for your time. Great information. Everybody find Rick online. I think they can ask a question on LinkedIn, and I'm sure Rick will follow up and answer it. Rick, thanks again.
Thank you, Alex.
Take care, everybody. Bye bye.